A man grabbed her suitcase right out of her hands and threw it into the dirt. "Stagecoach is for passengers," he sneered loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Not livestock." The laughter hit her like a slap. Evelyn Carter stood in the middle of Pine Creek, Colorado, dust on her shoes and humiliation burning across her face, and not one single person stepped forward to stop it. Not one. Until a quiet man at the edge of the crowd slowly set down his axe, straightened to his full height, and started walking. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach rolled into Pine Creek just after noon. Evelyn Carter had been awake for 31 hours. She knew that because she had counted every single one of them sitting stiff-backed on a wooden bench squeezed between a sleeping salesman who snored like a broken pipe organ and a window that would not close all the way, letting in cold mountain air that cut straight through her wool coat like it had a personal disagreement with her spine. She had used those 31 hours the way she always used difficult hours. She prayed a little. She planned a lot. And she repeated the same quiet promise to herself over and over again, the way you repeat something when you're not entirely sure you believe it yet. This time will be different. This time you will not let them break you. She had the letter tucked inside the left pocket of her coat. She had read it so many times that the paper had gone soft at the folds, the ink slightly smeared in 2 places, where she suspected, though she would never admit it, that she had cried on it. The letter was from a man named Nathaniel Walker, a rancher, a man who had placed an advertisement in a Missouri newspaper looking for a woman willing to come to Colorado and build a life in the mountains. The advertisement had been 6 sentences long. It had not promised romance. It had not promised comfort. It had promised hard work, honest treatment, and the possibility, just the possibility, of something real. For Evelyn Carter, that was more than anyone had ever offered her. She had answered it. He had written back. They had exchanged 4 letters over 3 months. Careful letters, measured letters, letters that said a great deal between the lines, even when the lines themselves stayed practical and plain. And now here she was, 25 years old, carrying 1 suitcase, wearing her best dress, which was still visibly homemade, stepping off a stagecoach into a mountain town she had never seen to meet a man she had never laid eyes on. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest. She told it to settle down. The door of the stagecoach swung open, and the driver, a lean man with sun-cracked skin, offered his hand to the woman who had been seated beside the window before Evelyn. A thin woman in a green dress who descended the steps like she was arriving at a proper hotel. Then the driver looked at Evelyn. His hand dropped. Not dramatically, not with cruelty even, just it dropped. Naturally. The way a hand drops when the gesture suddenly seems unnecessary, or perhaps misplaced. Or perhaps the truth. The real truth. When the person offering the hand looks at the person descending the steps and makes a silent calculation that takes less than a second, and determines that certain courtesies are wasted on certain kinds of women. Evelyn noticed. She always noticed. She had spent 25 years noticing every hand that dropped, every gaze that slid sideways, every smile that tightened into something polite, and pain the moment people got a full look at her. She had become fluent in the language of other people's discomfort, the way a person goes quiet, the way laughter gets swallowed, the way eyes move away and then come back as though trying to confirm what they think they saw. She stepped off the stagecoach herself, both feet on Colorado soil. She smoothed her coat with both hands, adjusted her grip on her suitcase, and lifted her chin, the way her mother had taught her chin up Evelyn always, no matter what. And she looked out at Pine Creek for the very first time. It was a small town. Frontier-built, mountain-weathered, the kind of town that looked like it had been dropped into the valley by accident and decided to stay. A general store. A livery stable. A church with a crooked steeple. A saloon that was already doing business at noon. Streets made of packed dirt and early autumn mud. Mountains rising up around everything so high and close that you had to tilt your head back to see where they ended. About 40 people were out on those streets, and within 30 seconds, most of them were looking at her. That was when the man stepped forward. He was not young, maybe 40, maybe older, built, broad and rough the way men get built when they spend their lives working outdoors instead of thinking about it. He had a thick coat on worn boots, a hat pushed back on his head. He was carrying something, a sack of something from the general store, and he stopped walking the moment Evelyn stepped off the coach, the way you stop when something catches your eye. But it was not admiration in his face. Not exactly. It was the beginning of something Evelyn could not immediately name. The thing she could name immediately was the man standing beside him. Younger, slicker, the kind of handsome that knows it's handsome and charges admission. He wore a good coat and clean boots, and the expression of a man who is always amused at someone else's expense. He leaned over to the man beside him and said something Evelyn could not hear, but she heard the laughter. She always heard the laughter. And then a third man, the one who would come to stand in her nightmares for a long time. A man standing closer to the stagecoach, a heavy-set man with red suspenders and a mouth that clearly never stopped working. That man reached forward and grabbed the handle of Evelyn's suitcase. She thought for one confused second that he was offering to carry it. He threw it right into the dirt. Right. Not far, maybe 4 feet, but far enough. Far enough to make her stumble forward. Far enough to make the brass clasp pop open and the contents shift. Far enough that 3 women standing near the general store pressed their hands over their mouths, not in horror, but to cover their laughter. Stagecoach is for passengers. The man in the red suspenders said, loud and cheerful, playing to his audience like he'd done this kind of thing before. Not livestock. The laughter was immediate. Not everyone. Not all 40 people. But enough. A sharp, bright crack of it that echoed off the storefronts and cut through the mountain air. Evelyn stood very still. Her suitcase was open in the dirt. The corner of her blue dress, the one she had saved for Sundays, was visible, half hanging out. Her heart was doing something she refused to let reach her face. She had learned that too, over 25 years. She had learned to take the hit and not flinch. Or at least to flinch only on the inside in the private room of herself where no one could see it. She walked forward. She crouched down. She pressed the dress back into the suitcase with deliberate, careful hands. She refastened the clasp. She stood up. And she said nothing. Because she had learned painfully repeatedly the hard way that saying nothing was sometimes the only kind of dignity available to her. The man with the red suspenders was still laughing. His audience was still watching. And then silence. Not the silence of indifference. A different kind. The kind that happens when something shifts in the air, when the temperature of a moment changes, and everyone feels it before they understand it. Evelyn heard boots on the dirt. Slow boots, deliberate. The kind of steps that take their time, not because they're uncertain, but because they have nowhere to rush to. They were unhurried in the way that something very large and very sure of itself is unhurried. She looked up. The broad-shouldered man with the worn coat and the pushed-back hat was walking toward her. Not toward the man in the red suspenders. Toward her. He stopped 3 feet in front of her, and he did something that took Evelyn a full moment to understand. He removed his hat. He held it against his chest. And he looked at her, not at her body, not at her size, not at the suitcase in the dirt. He looked at her face, and he said in a voice so quiet it was almost private, even out there on the public street, "Miss Carter." She stared at him. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Yes, I'm Nathaniel Walker." He reached down, picked up her suitcase easily, one hand like it weighed nothing, and straightened back up. "You've traveled a long way. I've got a wagon around the corner." He paused. "You deserve better than what just happened to you." The street had gone completely quiet now. Evelyn was looking at the man who had written her 4 careful letters, who had described his ranch in plain, honest language, who had said in his second letter, "I cannot offer you luxury, but I can offer you fairness, and I have found that fairness is rarer and more valuable than most people admit." She had not expected him to be this. She didn't know yet what this was. She only knew that her legs had stopped shaking, and her chin, which had been trying very hard to stay level, managed to stay level. "Thank you," she said. Nathaniel Walker nodded once. Then he turned, not to the crowd, not to the man with the red suspenders, not to anyone, and he walked carrying her suitcase around the corner. Evelyn followed him. Behind her, the town of Pine Creek stood in the kind of silence that meant they would be talking about this for a long time. The wagon was old but solid. The horse was a bay mare with calm eyes. Nathaniel set Evelyn's suitcase in the back without ceremony, and then stood beside the wagon without offering to help her up, which Evelyn noticed and appreciated actually, because being helped up into wagons was something that was sometimes done with a kind of exaggerated care that felt worse than not being helped at all. She climbed up herself. He climbed up on the other side. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The mare shifted her weight. A crow called somewhere above the storefronts. The sounds of Pine Creek voices reassembling themselves after the scene. A door opening, a child shouting somewhere drifted back in ordinary again. Then Nathaniel picked up the reins and said without looking at her, "I should have been standing there when the coach arrived. I was late coming out of the general store. I'm sorry for that." Evelyn looked at his profile. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "No," he agreed. "It wasn't. But I'm sorry for it anyway." She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it away somewhere careful. They rode in silence for a few minutes. The town thinned out, and the road began to climb. "The man with the red suspenders," Evelyn said finally. "Who is he?" Nathaniel's jaw moved slightly. "Bill Hartley. He owns the saloon." "Does he do that often?" A pause. "Often enough." "Has anyone ever told him to stop?" Another pause. Longer this time. "People laugh," Nathaniel said quietly. "When people laugh, a man like Hartley thinks he has permission." Evelyn nodded slowly. She looked out at the mountains beginning to fill the view ahead of them. "Your letters," she said. "You wrote that you had a brother." "Caleb." Something shifted in Nathaniel's voice. Just slightly. Just enough for someone paying attention to notice. "He lives in town. We don't have the same interests. What does he think about this?" She gestured vaguely between them. Nathaniel was quiet for what felt like a very long time. "He doesn't approve," he said at last. Evelyn absorbed that. "Because of me." "Because of himself," Nathaniel said. And then he said nothing else, and something in the way he said it made Evelyn understand clearly that this was a subject she would learn more about in time, and that learning it would not be comfortable. The ranch was another 40 minutes up the mountain. By the time they arrived, the afternoon light was going sideways and golden through the trees, and Evelyn, who had not eaten since early morning, was running entirely on the kind of grim determination that had carried her through most of her life. The house was not what she had pictured. She wasn't sure what she had pictured. Some part of her had imagined a ruin, something barely standing the kind of desperate situation that produced desperate advertisements in Missouri newspapers. But the house was solid. Rough, yes. Spare, certainly. But the wood was sound. The roof was intact. The porch boards were replaced where they needed replacing, and there was a garden to one side, late season half put to bed already, that showed someone's care and attention. "It's bigger than I expected," she said honestly. Nathaniel seemed genuinely surprised by that. Not defensive, just surprised as if he had been braced for some other response. "I've been building onto it for 10 years, he said. "By yourself?" "Mostly." She looked at the house for another moment. Then she looked at him. "Where do I sleep?" she asked. His expression shifted, something careful and deliberate moving across it. "I've made up the room on the left side of the house," he said. "It's yours. I'm in the room on the right." He paused. "Miss Carter, I want to be clear with you. I wrote to you honestly about what I needed, and I intend to honor what I wrote. You are here as a person, not as property. What grows between us, if anything grows—" He stopped. Start it again. I won't rush anything, and I won't pretend. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. You're a different kind of man, she said. I'm just a man, he said, who got tired of dishonest ones. She climbed down from the wagon. She picked up her own suitcase. She walked to the front door of the house. At the threshold she stopped and turned back to look at him, still standing by the wagon, still holding the reins, watching her with that same still unreadable expression that she was already beginning to understand was not coldness. It was just the face of a man who had learned not to waste expressions on things he wasn't sure about yet. Mr. Walker, she said. Nathaniel. Nathaniel. She tested the word. It fit strangely and completely at the same time. I want to be clear with you, too. I am not here because I had no other options. I am here because your letters were the first honest thing a man has ever said to me, and I intend to honor that. Something moved in his face. Just slightly. Just enough. Then we have the same starting point, he said. Evelyn nodded. She pushed open the door and went inside. The next morning arrived the way mornings arrived at altitude, fast, cold, and without any of the gentle easing in that lower elevations offer. One moment it was dark. The next gray light was cutting through the curtains, and the cold had snuck under 2 wool blankets to find her anyway. Evelyn lay still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she got up. She could hear faintly sounds from the other side of the house. Movement. Water. The chunk of a wood stove being opened and fed. She dressed quickly, pinned her hair without looking at herself in the small mirror on the wall. She had years of practice not looking at herself in mirrors. And she went into the kitchen. Nathaniel was already there, pouring water into a pot, wearing the same coat he'd worn yesterday, over a clean work shirt, his hair still uncombed. He looked up when she came in. He did not look surprised. I wasn't sure how long you'd sleep, he said. I don't sleep late, she said. He nodded slowly as if filing that away. Coffee, please. He poured it. She wrapped both hands around the tin cup and stood near the warmth of the stove. He stood on the other side of it. Morning light coming through the single kitchen window, mountains visible through the glass. What do you need me to do today? She asked. He looked at her. You've only just arrived. I know when I arrived, she said. I'm asking what needs to be done. He was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, not warm enough for that yet, but something that acknowledged her, recognized her, filed her in a different category than she suspected she had been filed in before. The cattle need feeding at first light, he said. Then the east fence has 2 posts that need resetting. Then there's a section of the barn roof that's been letting in water. He paused. The fence and the barn are both jobs for 2 people if the second person is willing. I'm willing, she said. You've never done either of those things, he said. It wasn't accusation, it was statement. No, she agreed. But I've never done a lot of things, and I've done all of them eventually. He looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup. All right, Miss Carter, he said. Evelyn. Evelyn, he said. And the way he said it, careful like he was making sure to remember it exactly, was a small thing that she put away in the same careful place she had put the other small things. The cattle feeding did not go well. This was expected. What was not expected was the way Nathaniel handled it. He did not take over. He did not sigh. He did not perform any of the particular brand of patience that is actually just condescension wearing a pleasant face, the kind that says, I'll wait while you figure this out, but we both know you'll fail. He showed her once. Then he stepped back and let her try. She got it wrong twice. The cattle were unimpressed with her. One of them, a large, absolutely opinionless animal, with enormous eyes bumped against her shoulder with enough force to knock her off balance, and she staggered and sat down in the mud. For one single horrifying second, she thought about the man with the red suspenders. She thought about the laughter. She thought about the word livestock. And then she heard Nathaniel's voice. "He does that to everyone the first week," he said. "His name is Henry. He thinks he's helping." There was no laugh in his voice, just the fact of it offered plainly. Evelyn looked up at the enormous, opinionless animal now regarding her from approximately 6 inches away. "Henry," she said flatly. Henry blinked. She got back up. The fence took 3 hours and was genuinely hard work, the kind that makes your back speak to you in a language you didn't know you were fluent in. She learned to handle the tools by watching once and then attempting. She got splinters. She lost her grip once and nearly dropped a post on her own foot. Nathaniel caught the post without comment and handed it back to her. At noon, they sat on a fallen log near the east fence line and ate bread and cold meat that Evelyn had found in the kitchen that morning and packed without being asked. Nathaniel looked at the wrapped bread in his hand with an expression Evelyn could not fully interpret. "I didn't ask you to do this," he said. "No," she agreed. He took a bite. He said nothing else. But when they stood up to go back to work, he picked up the larger of the 2 tools, without discussion, leaving her the more manageable one, and she thought privately that there were men who would have made a production of being useful, and men who were simply useful, and that Nathaniel Walker was definitively the second kind. They were 3 days into this rhythm. This strange, careful, productive silence that had started to develop its own texture and temperature when Caleb Walker came to the ranch. Evelyn was in the kitchen attempting to make bread from a recipe she had copied from memory when she heard the sound of a horse coming up the road fast. Not panicked, just fast. The way people ride when they believe their own arrival is significant. She heard Nathaniel's voice outside low, measured the way he always was. And then a second voice, different in every way. Warmer, louder, smoother, the kind of voice trained for rooms not open air. She didn't go to the window. She kept working the bread dough. She heard the second voice say clearly enough through the wall, "Nathan, I'm just here to see how things are." And Nathaniel's voice, "Things are fine, Caleb." "That's not what people in town are saying." Silence. "What are people in town saying?" Nathaniel said. It was not quite a question. It was the kind of sentence that knows the answer already and doesn't like it, that you've lost your mind. Caleb's voice was still pleasant. That was the thing about it. It stayed pleasant while saying unpleasant things, which was a particular skill that Evelyn recognized immediately because she had met that skill before in other people. That you went and fetched yourself a woman who can't do ranch work, can't cook, can't manage a mountain winter, and a pause precisely long enough to be deliberate. Who's going to be a burden on you before the snow comes? Caleb. I'm not criticizing you. I'm telling you what people are saying. People say a lot of things, Nathaniel said. Doesn't make them true. It makes them a problem, Caleb said. A man's reputation is... Go home, Caleb. A brief silence. Then that smooth voice again, its pleasantness unruffled. I just want what's best for you, Nathan. I know what you want, Nathaniel said. Go home. She heard the sound of a horse being turned, unhurried. The particular unhurriedness of a man who is leaving because he has chosen to, not because he was made to. Then, Nathaniel's boots on the porch steps. He came inside. He found Evelyn working the bread dough. She did not ask him what had been said. She knew what had been said. He sat down at the kitchen table and was quiet for a moment. My brother, he said eventually. I gathered, she said. He's not. Nathaniel stopped, reconsidered, started again. He's not a bad person. Evelyn kept working the dough. She had learned 25 years ago that when someone says he's not a bad person, they are almost always about to describe a bad person. They just love them, or need them, or are afraid of them, and love and need and fear make the truth inconvenient. She said nothing. He'll come back, Nathaniel said. I know, she said. He looked at her, really looked at her in the way that she was starting to recognize as his particular form of attention, which was total and quiet and slightly unsettling because she was not accustomed to being looked at like she was worth looking at. "Are you afraid of him?" Nathaniel asked. She thought about it honestly. "Not of him," she said. "Of what he might convince other people of." Nathaniel was quiet. "I've spent my whole life," she said, keeping her voice level, her hands still working, "watching people get convinced of things about me before they knew me. It's very fast, that convincing. Slower to undo." She paused. "If it ever undoes it all." The kitchen was quiet. The bread dough was almost ready. "It'll undo," Nathaniel said finally. "If the thing they're convinced of is wrong." She looked up at him. "How do you know?" He held her gaze. "Because I was wrong too," he said quietly. "When I placed that advertisement, I had a picture in my mind of who would answer it, what she'd be like. I was wrong about all of it." He paused. "And I've been wrong about enough things in my life to know that wrong can be corrected. It just takes time," she said. "Evidence," he said. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. Outside, a wind had come up through the pines. The stove ticked. Somewhere below, Henry the cattle made a sound of profound personal opinion about something. "Then I'd better get more evidence," Evelyn said. She put the bread in to bake, and Nathaniel Walker sat at that kitchen table and watched the woman the town had already decided to discard, and something moved in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. He didn't have a word for it yet, but it was there. That evening after supper, bread that turned out better than expected, which Nathaniel acknowledged with a nod that Evelyn was beginning to understand was his version of high praise. She sat on the porch steps in the cold evening air and looked out at the mountains going dark against a sky full of stars. She pulled Nathaniel's first letter from her coat pocket. She had moved it there from the left pocket to the right, without quite deciding to which was the way she did many things. She didn't read it. She already knew every word. She just held it. She thought about the man in the red suspenders, the laughter on the street, her suitcase in the dirt, the sound of boots, slow, deliberate, certain crossing toward her. "You've traveled a long way. You deserve respect." She folded the letter again carefully along the same soft creases it already had. Behind her, the door opened. Nathaniel came out and stood at the top of the porch steps. He didn't sit. He rarely sat on the porch. She'd noticed that already 3 days in. He stood the way men stand when they've spent their lives outdoors, and sitting feels like a concession. "Cold night coming," he said. "I don't mind cold," she said. He stood there a moment longer, looking at the same dark mountains she was looking at. Then he said quietly, without ceremony, "I'm glad you came, Evelyn." She held very still. "Even with all of it?" she asked. "The town, your brother, all of it?" He looked down at her. "Especially," he said, "because of all of it." And he went back inside. Evelyn sat on the steps for a long time after that. The stars over the Colorado mountains were extraordinary. She had not expected that. She had expected so many things coming here. Difficulty, hardship, the long work of proving herself to a world that had already decided not to be impressed, and she had not been wrong about any of those things. But she had not expected the stars. She had not expected a man who picked up a hat off his own head to address her on a public street. She had not expected bread that turned out better than expected, or a cattle named Henry, or a kitchen with a window that faced the mountains, or the particular quality of a silence shared with someone who understood that some things don't need to be said out loud. She had not expected in the middle of all of it to feel something she had nearly stopped believing she would ever feel again. She tucked the letter back into her pocket. She went inside. Tomorrow there would be more work, more mud, more learning, more proving. Caleb Walker would come back. The town would keep talking. Bill Hartley would still have a saloon and a mouth and an audience. None of that had changed. But something else had. And Evelyn Carter, who had spent 25 years being told exactly what she was worth, was starting for the very first time to disagree. The bread was better on the fourth day. Not perfect. The bottom was still a little dark, and the center was denser than it should have been, but better. Evelyn had been awake since before the gray light came, standing in that kitchen, running through every step in her head. Before she did it, adjusting the heat, adjusting the time, making herself learn it properly, instead of just hoping it would work out. Nathaniel ate 2 pieces without comment. For the first 3 days, she had read his silences as indifference. She was beginning to understand they were something else. When Nathaniel Walker said nothing, it usually meant the thing in front of him was acceptable. When something was not acceptable, he said so directly and without decoration. She had watched him do it with a fence post that was set at the wrong angle. He simply said, "That's going to fail by winter. It needs to come out and go back in 2 inches further east." And she had understood that his directness was not unkindness. It was just the way a man speaks when he has spent years alone with no one to perform for. She was learning to find it restful. That morning after breakfast, when she was cleaning up the kitchen and he was pulling on his work coat by the door, he stopped and turned back. "I'm going into Pine Creek today," he said. She kept wiping down the counter. "All right. I have to speak to the man at the mill about lumber. I'll be a few hours." He paused. "You can come or stay." She thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "I'll come," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but something adjacent to it. "It won't be easy," he said. "After the first day." "Nothing is," she said, and went to get her coat. Pine Creek looked different the second time. It wasn't smaller exactly. It was the same storefronts, the same mud streets, the same mountain ridges pressing in from 3 sides. But the first time she had arrived as a stranger, stepping off a stagecoach with everything exposed and nothing established, and the town had seen her the way a place sees someone who doesn't belong yet. This time she was arriving on a wagon beside Nathaniel Walker, and that was a different kind of visibility. She felt the shift the moment they turned onto the main street. People looked. They always looked. But now the looking had a different texture to it. Less amusement, more calculation. The kind of looking that is doing math. Figuring out what Nathaniel keeping her around meant about her, or about him, or about the story they had already decided to tell. Nathaniel pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the mill. He climbed down. He came around to her side without discussion and waited, not offering his hand, but present. Close enough. She climbed down. They walked into the mill together. The man at the mill, a compact gray-haired man named Hollis, who had the particular squint of someone who has spent decades looking at things and deciding their value, glanced at Evelyn when they walked in, looked back at Nathaniel and said, "This the one from Missouri?" "This is Evelyn Carter," Nathaniel said. "She's at the ranch." Hollis nodded a nod that was not quite warm and not quite cold, and said a great deal about how Pine Creek was going to receive information and recategorize it gradually, and with no particular enthusiasm. "Well," he said. "Well," Evelyn said back pleasantly. Hollis looked at her. A flicker of something, surprise maybe, or recalibration crossed his face. Then he turned back to Nathaniel, and they talked lumber prices for 20 minutes, while Evelyn stood beside the door and listened and said nothing. She was not insulted by not being included in the conversation. She was busy. She was cataloging everything. The way Hollis spoke to Nathaniel with respect, real respect, the kind that had been earned over years. The way he mentioned the names of 3 other men in town whose opinions clearly mattered to Nathaniel's business. The way he lowered his voice slightly when he mentioned Caleb Walker's name, as if Caleb were someone to be discussed carefully. She filed all of it. She had learned in 25 years of being underestimated that the most useful thing an underestimated person can do is pay close attention while everyone assumes they aren't. When they came back outside, Nathaniel said, "I need to stop at the general store, then we can go." "Take your time," she said. She waited by the wagon. She had been there approximately 4 minutes when the 2 women appeared. They were not malicious women. That was the complicated part. If they had been straightforwardly malicious, it would have been easier. Instead, they were the kind of women who believe they are being kind, while doing something unkind, which is a much harder thing to navigate. They were both older than Evelyn, mid-30s. well-dressed for a frontier town, the kind of women who run the church auxiliary and know everyone's business, and genuinely sincerely believe that knowing everyone's business is the same as caring about them. The taller one, a woman with sharp blue eyes and a sympathetic mouth, stopped beside the wagon with the air of someone delivering good news. "You're the woman Nathaniel brought in," she said, not unkindly. "I'm Evelyn Carter," Evelyn said. "Yes, I'm Margaret Hollis." "The millman's wife, of course. And this is Ruth Sayers." She paused. "We just wanted to say we think it's very brave, what you're doing." Evelyn looked at her. "Brave?" she repeated. "Coming all this way. To try." Margaret's voice was warm, genuinely warm, the kind of warmth that does not notice its own edge. A lot of women wouldn't. A lot of women would think twice. Ruth added with the slight nod of someone confirming an agreement they had already reached before the conversation started. Evelyn understood exactly what they were saying. They were saying a woman in your situation with your appearance should be grateful for any opportunity and not expect too much. They were saying it with kindness. They were saying it without cruelty. But they were saying it. She smiled. "I don't think of it as brave," she said pleasantly. "Mr. Walker needed a capable partner. I am capable. It seemed like a sensible match." Margaret blinked. Ruth's nod slowed. "Of course," Margaret said after a moment. "Of course, yes." "He's a good man," Ruth offered, as if Evelyn might not have noticed. "He is," Evelyn agreed. "We're well matched." She said it simply, factually, not defiantly. Defiance would have given them something to push back against. She said it the way you say a thing that is true and does not require defense, and she watched both women do the subtle recalibration that happened when someone refuses to occupy the space you've prepared for them. "Well," Margaret said finally, "if you need anything, I'll ask," Evelyn said. "Thank you." They moved on. Evelyn let out a breath she had not entirely admitted she was holding. When Nathaniel came out of the general store a few minutes later carrying a wrapped parcel, he looked at her face and then looked in the direction Margaret and Ruth had gone. "Margaret Hollis," he guessed. "And Ruth Sayers," she confirmed. He climbed up onto the wagon. "What did they say?" "That I was very brave," Evelyn said. A pause. "Lord," Nathaniel said, and picked up the reins. It was the first time she had ever heard him say anything like that, and she laughed a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the kind she hadn't heard come out of herself in longer than she could measure. He glanced at her sideways, and something happened at the corners of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but it was the closest thing to one she had seen from him so far. She filed that too. Caleb came back on a Tuesday. This time he did not stay outside. Nathaniel was out at the far end of the property, checking the north fence line, when they heard a horse in the yard, and Evelyn was alone in the house when the knock came at the door. She opened it and found Caleb Walker standing on the porch with his good coat and his clean boots, and that face that was Nathaniel's face, rearranged into something smoother and more practiced, and somehow, as a result, less trustworthy. He smiled. It was a very good smile. "Miss Carter," he said. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Caleb Walker, Nathaniel's brother." "I know who you are," she said. If the directness surprised him, he didn't show it. His smile stayed exactly as it was, which in itself told her something. A real smile changes when the ground shifts under it. A practiced smile does not. "May I come in?" he asked. She thought about this honestly. She thought about Nathaniel's voice through the wall he doesn't approve, and she thought about the lowered voice in the mill when Hollis mentioned Caleb's name, and she thought about the particular pleasantness of a voice trained for rooms rather than open air. She stepped back from the door. Not all the way, just enough. "I'll put coffee on," she said. He came inside and looked around the kitchen with the expression of a man inspecting property. He has a prior claim to which told Evelyn everything she needed to know about how Caleb Walker saw his brother's home. She put the coffee on. He sat at the kitchen table without being invited to sit, which also told her things. "I'll be honest with you," he said, which was the thing people always said right before they were not entirely honest. "Please," she said. "My brother is a solitary man. He always has been. He doesn't—" Caleb paused, appearing to choose his words, which Evelyn suspected was less choosing and more performing. "He doesn't make the best decisions when he's lonely." She poured the coffee. She set a cup in front of him. She sat down across from him with her own cup and looked at him directly and said, "What decision are you concerned about?" He looked at her. He had very blue eyes, clearer than Nathaniel's, the kind of blue that photographs well and inspires immediate trust from people who go by photographs. "This arrangement," he said carefully. "Our arrangement," she said. "Mine and Nathaniel's." "Yes." He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "Miss Carter, I'm not trying to be unkind, but my brother placed a newspaper advertisement because he was desperate, and you answered it because—" He paused again. "Because I wanted to," she said clearly. He went on as if she hadn't spoken. "Because opportunities for women in your situation are limited, and I understand that. I don't judge it." He said "I don't judge it" in the particular way that meant he was actively judging it. "But I want you to understand that Nathaniel has obligations here, family obligations, business obligations, and bringing in someone who isn't prepared for the reality of this life." "Who isn't prepared?" she repeated. "The winters here are brutal. I've read about them. Reading about them is different from surviving them." "Yes," she said. "That's why I'm here in September and not February, to learn before they arrive." A pause. Caleb tilted his head slightly, and for the first time the practiced smile slipped just a little. Not much, just enough to show what was underneath it, which was something with considerably more edge. "You're very composed," he said. "I'm very tired," she said pleasantly. "Of conversations like this one." The slip disappeared. The smile came back full. "I'm only thinking of Nathaniel," he said. "I know," she said. "This could damage his reputation in town." "His reputation for what?" she asked. "For making his own choices." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up. He left the coffee half-finished, which told her the coffee had never been the point. "I hope things work out for you both," he said, and the warmth in his voice was so complete and so manufactured that it turned her stomach slightly. "Thank you for coming by," she said from the table, not standing. He left. She sat still for a moment. Then she got up, and she poured his half-finished coffee into the basin because she did not want it in the house. Nathaniel came back an hour later. She told him Caleb had come by. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, his expression doing the thing she was starting to recognize, that particular stillness that was not blankness, but was actually a great deal of active processing happening very quietly. "What did he say?" Nathaniel asked. "That he was thinking of you," she said. "That I wasn't prepared for mountain winters. That this arrangement might damage your reputation." Nathaniel was quiet. "And what did you say?" he asked. "Not much," she said. "But what I said I meant." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" The question caught her off guard. People asked it rarely, and when they did, they usually asked it as a formality. A social gesture, not an actual inquiry. Nathaniel asked it the way he asked everything, directly, without decoration, genuinely wanting to know the answer. "I'm fine," she said. And then, because he was looking at her with the full quality of his attention, "I've met people like him before. I know how to be in a room with them." "That shouldn't be a skill anyone has to have," he said. She looked at him. "No," she said. "But it is for some of us." He pulled out the kitchen chair and sat down heavily, pulling off his hat and setting it on the table. He rubbed a hand across his face. She had not seen him do that before, that gesture of exhaustion, that moment of the mask dropping, and she understood that this was not comfortable for him either. Caleb was not a stranger. Caleb was family, and family who hurts you is a different kind of hurt. "He's been trying to get me to sell the North acreage for 2 years, Nathaniel said finally. She was quiet. "He has a buyer. Someone from Denver. Wants the timber rights." He paused. "I won't sell. The north acreage is the water access for the whole property. Without it, the ranch is worth half what it is, maybe less. And he knows that, she said. Of course he knows it. The tiredness in his voice was not soft. It was the particular tiredness of someone who loves a person and has had to watch that person be wrong repeatedly and choose to stay wrong. He's known it for 2 years. He just keeps coming back at it from different angles. She sat down across from him. So when he says I'm not suited for this life, she said slowly, and that I might damage your reputation, he wants you gone, Nathaniel said flatly. Because while you're here, the ranch runs well, and I have less reason to consider selling anything. The kitchen was very quiet. He's using me, she said. As an angle. Yes. She absorbed this. It should have made her feel worse. In a way, it made her feel better, not because being used as a lever in a property dispute was comfortable, but because it made the shape of the thing clear. It gave it edges. Edges she could see and account for. Then we deal with it, she said. Nathaniel looked at her across the table. You're not frightened, he said. I didn't say that, she said. I said we deal with it. Something moved through his expression, complicated and real, and not yet fully named. You're a different kind of woman, he said. It was almost exactly what she had said to him on their first day. He said it differently. He said it with something in his voice that had not been there on the first day, that had been accumulating slowly over 10 days of shared work and shared meals, and the particular intimacy of 2 people building trust in a kitchen where nothing was said that wasn't meant. She looked down at her hands on the table. I'm just a woman, she said quietly. Who's been told her whole life what she can't do? I got tired of believing it. Nathaniel reached across the table. He put his hand over hers, just for a moment. Just briefly, the way a man touches something carefully, because he is not certain yet of his right to touch it, but certain enough to try. Then he pulled his hand back. He stood up and went to hang his coat. Evelyn sat at the table and looked at her own hand. The following week she burned the beans. Not slightly. Fully. Comprehensively. The pot was black on the inside, the kitchen had smoke in it, and when Nathaniel came in from the barn and looked at the pot and then at her face, she was already standing there, with the expression of someone who has decided to be irritated with herself rather than embarrassed. I was distracted, she said. What by? He asked. I was reading. She held up the book she'd been carrying, a livestock management manual she had found on his shelf. I lost track of time. He looked at the burnt pot. He looked at the book. He looked at her. I have more beans, he said. I know where they are, she said. She started over. He sat at the table with a piece of harness leather he'd been repairing and worked on it while she cooked. And this, the 2 of them in the kitchen, with a task each not talking, not needing to talk, had become by now one of the things she noticed and did not say out loud. The section on winter feeding schedules, she said after a while, not looking up from the pot. What about it? He said, not looking up from the leather. It says to start supplementing hay 3 weeks before the first freeze. That's right. When's the first freeze usually? Depends on the year, generally mid-October. She did the calculation. We have about 6 weeks. 5.5 if it comes early. She nodded. She turned the heat down slightly and checked the beans. How much hay do we have? She asked. He looked up. Really looked up this time. Enough for 8 weeks, he said. So we might need more. Might, he said. How much does it cost from Hollis? He told her the number. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. If we sold the surplus eggs, she said carefully, and the preserves I've been putting up, there's a market in town on Saturdays that would cover about 1/3 of it. Nathaniel had gone very still on his side of the kitchen. You've been putting up preserves, he said. The apples on the east side of the property were going, she said. I didn't want to waste them. There's 14 jars on the shelf in the side room. She paused. I should have told you. It's your kitchen. It's your kitchen too, he said. Quietly, Directly, without the slight pause that would have meant he was being polite rather than meaning it. She turned back to the beans. "Then yes," she said. "Sell the preserves. We'll have enough for hay." "Evelyn." She looked over her shoulder. He was looking at her with that full, still attention. "Thank you," he said. Like the word was a complete sentence, like it was enough. "The beans will be ready in 20 minutes, she said, and turned back to the stove. The following Saturday, she went to the market in Pine Creek alone. Nathaniel had offered to come. She had told him she was fine, and she was, and also she wanted to do it herself, because there is a kind of proving that needs to happen in private without a witness, without someone to catch you if you stumble. She needed to know she could stand in the center of that town and sell preserves, and look people in the eye, and hold herself together on her own strength and no one else's. She sold 11 of the 14 jars in 2 hours. Margaret Hollis bought 2. Ruth Sayers bought 1 grudgingly, and then took a second when she tasted the sample Evelyn offered. A man she didn't recognize bought 3 and said they were the best apple preserves he'd had since his mother died, and Evelyn thanked him and meant it. Bill Hartley walked past the market table. He saw her. His face did the calculation, the same fast, dismissive calculation it had done the first day on the street. And he laughed once, a short sound, and said to the man beside him, just loud enough, "Wheeler asked me if she'd lasted 2 weeks yet. Told him to wait for the first snow." The man beside him laughed. Evelyn looked up. She looked directly at Bill Hartley. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She held his gaze for exactly long enough that he was the one who looked away first, not because she was threatening, not because she said anything, but because there is a particular kind of steadiness in a person who has already survived everything you can say about them, and that steadiness has a presence that most people, even unpleasant ones, can feel when they're standing in front of it. Hartley moved on. The woman at the table beside Evelyn, an older woman selling dried herbs with a weathered face and no patience for nonsense, said without preamble, "That man has been a problem in this town since 1874. "I don't doubt it," Evelyn said, straightening her remaining jars. "You held up well," the woman said. "I've had practice," Evelyn said. The woman looked at her sideways. "You're the one Nathaniel Walker brought in," she said. "I'm Evelyn Carter," she said. "I'm at the Walker Ranch." "Irene Pruitt," the woman said. "I've known Nathaniel Walker for 15 years. She paused. "He's a man who doesn't make mistakes twice." Evelyn looked at her. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means," Irene said carefully, "that when Nathaniel Walker does something, it's because he's thought about it a long time and decided it's right." She looked back at her herbs. "He's not a man who does things to try them. He does things because he's sure." The market moved around them. Someone's child ran past. A dog barked 2 stalls down. "He seems sure," Evelyn said softly, mostly to herself. "He is," Irene said. "The question is whether you are." Evelyn looked at her. "I'm getting there," she said honestly. Irene nodded. Once, with a respect that was real, and that cost something the way real respect always does. "Good," she said. "Then you'll be fine." On the ride back to the ranch that afternoon, with the cash from the preserves tucked in her coat pocket, and 3 remaining jars wrapped carefully in the back of the wagon, Evelyn thought about what Irene Pruitt had said. He's not a man who does things to try them. She thought about the first letter, the 6 sentences, the honesty in them that she had felt even through paper, even at 1,000 miles distance, something real, something unperformed, something that did not offer more than it could deliver. She thought about a hand reaching down for a suitcase in the dirt. She thought about, "You deserve respect," said quietly on a public street to a woman everyone else had already decided didn't. She thought about a hand placed briefly over hers on a kitchen table, and then withdrawn not coldly but carefully. The way you handle something you are not certain yet is yours to handle, but are already quite sure you would like it to be. She turned the wagon up the last climb toward the ranch. The mountains were going orange and gold in the afternoon light, and the air had the first real edge of coming cold in it, and somewhere below in the barn, Henry was undoubtedly expressing opinions about the dinner schedule. And there was a man in that house who had said, "It's your kitchen too," and meant every word of it. Evelyn Carter, who had spent 25 years being told exactly what she was starting to understand exactly what she was becoming. And it was bigger than anything Pine Creek had laughed at. It was bigger than anything they had seen coming. And it was only just beginning. 3 weeks after Evelyn sold the last of the apple preserves, Nathaniel Walker kissed her for the first time. It was not romantic in the way people imagine romance. There was no soft light, no planned moment, no speech prepared in advance. They had been working the north fence line for 4 hours in a cold wind that had turned mean by mid-morning. And at some point during the 3rd hour, without discussion, they had started working in the specific synchronized way that two people develop only after they've worked beside each other long enough to stop thinking about the other person and simply start moving with them. Her holding the post, him setting it, her knowing when to brace before he told her to brace him, knowing when she was tiring and shifting his grip to carry more of the weight without drawing attention to it. On the walk back, she slipped. Not badly. The ground had frozen in a thin crust overnight, and it was deceptive under her boots. And she went sideways, and his hand shot out and caught her arm and pulled her upright, and they stood there for a half-second, close, his hand still on her arm, her hand catching his coat front, both of them catching their breath. He looked at her. She looked at him, and he kissed her brief, certain, neither asking nor taking the way a man kisses a woman when he has been thinking about it long enough that the moment simply arrives and he meets it. She kissed him back. Then they both looked away, and they walked the rest of the way to the house in a silence that was entirely different from all the other silences, charged and warm and quietly enormous. And when they got inside, she put the kettle on, and he hung up his coat, and neither of them said a word about it. But when he sat down at the table, there was something in his face that had not been there before. A settled thing, a decided thing. Like a man who has been standing at a door for a long time and has finally walked through it and found on the other side exactly what he hoped was there. She kept her back to him while the kettle heated. She was smiling. She did not let him see that yet. But she was. Boom. October arrived the way Nathaniel had warned, not gently. The first hard frost came on the 8th, which was 2 weeks earlier than most years, and 4 days earlier than Nathaniel's most cautious estimate. And the morning it arrived, Evelyn woke at 4 in the morning to a sound she did not immediately recognize. A low, distressed sound from the barn, half swallowed by wind. She was out of bed before she was fully awake. She pulled on her coat over her nightgown, shoved her feet into her boots without lacing them, and was through the front door and across the yard before the cold had fully registered, which was when she heard Nathaniel's voice from inside the barn, low and urgent, talking to something, or someone, in the way men talk when the situation is serious and talking is the only tool immediately available. She pushed open the barn door. 2 of the ranch hands, young men brothers named Pete and Cody Marsh, who came up from town 3 days a week, were inside, and they had been there since well before dawn because the water lines had frozen and one of the cattle had gone down in the night. Not Henry, a younger one, a heifer, not yet 2 years old, who was lying on her side in the far stall with her legs working in short, weak movements, while Nathaniel knelt beside her in the dirty straw. "What do we need?" Evelyn said. Nathaniel looked up. He did not ask what she was doing there. He did not tell her to go back inside. "Hot water," he said. "As much as you can carry. And the medicine box on the shelf by the tack room door." She was already moving. She brought the medicine box first, then went back and forth 3 times with water heated on the stove, and during that time, she listened to Nathaniel's voice, to the heifer's breathing, to Pete and Cody, working the water line in the near dark, and she learned more about how a man runs a ranch in crisis than she could have learned from any manual. He was calm. He was completely, utterly calm. Not the calm of someone who isn't frightened, but the calm of someone who understands that frightened doesn't help, so they set it aside and deal with what is in front of them and save the frightened for later. By 6 in the morning, the heifer was on her feet. Pete and Cody got the water line running again by 8. Evelyn made breakfast for all 4 of them, large plain filling, and they ate it standing in the kitchen, too tired to sit, while outside, the frost had hardened everything to a white-gray stillness. Cody Marsh, who was 19 and sunburned and had the directness of someone who had not yet learned to be indirect, said around a mouthful of bread, "Miss Carter, you were out here before I was this morning." "I heard the heifer," she said. "Pete's room is closer to the barn than your house, and Pete didn't hear it," Cody said. Pete, who was 22 and more dignified than his brother, said Cody. "What I'm just saying, she was out here first." Nathaniel, who was leaning against the counter with his coffee, looked at Evelyn from across the kitchen. She met his eyes briefly. She refilled Cody's coffee. "Eat your breakfast," she said. Petul. It was Pete Marsh, actually, who told her first. It was the following Tuesday. Nathaniel was in town at the mill, and Pete had come up to do the heavy fence work on the south side, and at noon Evelyn brought him coffee, and he took it with the look of a man who has been working himself up to say something for a while. "Miss Carter," he said. "Pete." He looked at his coffee cup. "There's something going around town. I don't know if you've heard it." She was very still. "Tell me," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who liked delivering bad news. She could see that in him, clearly, in the way he held his shoulders and the way his jaw worked before words came out. "People are saying," he said carefully, "that you were that the night of the frost." He stopped, started again. "That the reason you were out at the barn so early was that you'd heard Cody come in from Pine Creek the night before. That you'd gone out to—" He stopped again. A cold, specific feeling moved through Evelyn's chest. "That I'd gone out to meet Cody," she said. Pete didn't answer. His silence was the answer. She sat down. "Who's saying this?" she said. Her voice was completely even, the kind of even that takes everything you have. Pete's jaw tightened. "I've heard it from 3 people, the way it's going around." He shook his head. "Someone started it intentional. This doesn't spread this fast on its own." She looked at her own hands on the table. Cody Marsh was 19 years old. He was a boy. He was a sunburned, direct, kind-hearted boy who had said at the breakfast table with nothing in his voice but simple admiration that she had been at the barn before him. And someone had taken that and built something filthy out of it. She knew who. She did not say it out loud. She just knew it the way you know the shape of a thing in the dark, because you've already held it in the light. "Does Nathaniel know?" she asked. "I don't know," Pete said. He was looking at her with something in his face that she recognized after a moment as anger on her behalf. That was unexpected. It moved through her strangely that anger of a young man directed not at her, but for her. "I'm telling you first. I thought you should know before he does, so you're not caught off guard." Evelyn sat with it for a long moment. "Thank you, Pete," she said. She meant it entirely. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded. He drank his coffee. He went back to work without making a production of it, which was exactly what she needed from him right then. She sat at the table alone. She thought about 25 years of being the subject of things she did not do. She thought about the particular exhaustion of defending yourself against stories that are not true, but that spread faster than truth ever does, because a lie about a woman like her confirmed what people already wanted to believe, and truth had to fight for every inch. She thought about Nathaniel. She thought about the kiss on the frozen ground, the settled thing in his face afterward, the way he had said, "It's your kitchen too," like it was simply fact. Then she got up. She put on her coat. She walked to the barn, and she did the afternoon feeding by herself without Pete, because she needed to do something physical and real and solid while she decided what she was going to do. Henry bumped her shoulder. She pressed her forehead against his enormous, opinionless face. "Don't," she told him. He blinked. She straightened up. She decided. "Mom." Nathaniel came home at 4. She told him the moment he walked through the door. She did not ease into it. She did not build up to it. She had decided on the walk back from the barn that easing in was a luxury she could not afford, and that Nathaniel Walker, of all people, deserved to hear the truth directly, quickly, without softening. She told him what Pete had said. She told him how it was spreading. She told him who she believed had started it. He stood in the kitchen doorway and listened with the full, still quality of his attention, and his face did not change while she spoke. Not the way faces change when news is surprising, but the way faces change when something you already feared has finally arrived in its actual shape and size. When she finished, he was quiet for what felt like a very long time. "Are you angry at me?" she asked. He looked at her sharply. "Why would I be angry at you? Some men would be," she said, "even knowing it isn't true. Some men don't like the noise." "I'm not some men," he said. "No," she said. "But I wanted to ask." He came into the kitchen fully and took off his hat and set it on the table and sat down. He was quiet for another moment. "Caleb has been in town all week," he said. "He's been spending time at Hartley's saloon." He said it the way you say something when the pieces have just aligned themselves into a picture you didn't want to see. "I knew he was working something. I didn't know it was this." "The property," she said. "The property," he agreed. "If he can get rid of you, if he makes this place uncomfortable enough, if he makes the town loud enough, he thinks I'll give up." He said it flatly, without self-pity. He's done this before. Not this. But he finds the thing that matters to a person, and he pushes on it. "And I'm the thing that matters," she said. The words were out before she considered them. Nathaniel looked up at her. The kitchen was completely quiet. "Yes," he said. "Just that. Simple and direct and without any of the careful hedging that men sometimes use when they are frightened of meaning exactly what they say." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "Then we have a problem," she said, "because he's not going to stop." "No," Nathaniel said. "He's not. And the town will keep listening." "For a while," he said. "Until they have a reason not to." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "What reason do we give them?" she asked. He looked at her steadily. "The truth, consistently, over time." "That's slow," she said. "It's the only thing that lasts," he said. She wanted to believe that. She had believed versions of it her whole life, the idea that if you simply kept being who you were, honestly and consistently, eventually the world would notice. The trouble was that the world was not always paying the kind of attention that rewarded consistency. The world, in her experience, paid attention to drama. It paid attention to the loud thing. The first thing said the story that fit the shape it already expected. But she looked at Nathaniel's face, at this quiet, stubborn, honest man, who had set down his hat on her kitchen table, like he was setting down a flag, and she thought that maybe consistency in his hands and hers together might move faster than it had ever moved when she was working alone. "All right," she said. "Then we give them the truth." He nodded. "Starting with Cody Marsh," she said. He looked at her. "Cody told the story at breakfast, openly, in front of everyone. He told it plainly and without any of the things being added to it now." She kept her voice even. "If he tells that same story in town, what he actually said, what he actually saw, it cuts the ground out from under the other version." Nathaniel was quiet, considering. "He'd do it," he said finally. "Cody's a straight-talking kid. He doesn't know how to lie convincingly even when he tries." "Then ask him," she said. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment with an expression she could not entirely read. Something complicated and layered moving through it, some mixture of things that had not fully resolved themselves yet. "You are not what I expected," he said finally. She almost smiled. "You've said that before." "I mean it more now than I did then," he said. Cody Marsh, when approached by Nathaniel the following morning, turned an extraordinary shade of red. "Who said that?" he said. His voice cracked slightly on the second word, which was also extraordinary, since Cody's voice had presumably finished cracking at least 5 years ago. "Who is saying that about Miss Carter?" "People in town," Nathaniel said. "Which people?" Cody said, with the particular fury of a young man who has not yet learned to pace his outrage and deploys all of it at once. "Because I will walk into town right now and tell them exactly what happened, which is nothing, which is. She heard the heifer before anyone, and came out to help before I even had my boots on. And if anyone is saying that she... He stopped. His ears were red. "Who is saying that?" That's not the question right now, Nathaniel said. The question is whether you'll go into town and tell it straight. Of course I'll tell it straight, Cody said, as if there had never been any other option. Pete, are you coming? Pete, who had been leaning on the fence 10 feet away observing this scene with the contained expression of a man who had known his brother his entire life and therefore could not be surprised, said, "Yes, Cody." They went into town that afternoon. Evelyn did not go with them. Nathaniel asked if she wanted to. She said no. She said the story needed to travel on its own feet, through the mouths of people who weren't her, because her mouth on her own behalf was the least convincing possible source in a town that had already decided what to believe about her. "You're right," Nathaniel said. "I know," she said. Batch. But Caleb moved faster than Cody. That evening, an hour after Pete and Cody had gone into town, a wagon came up the road to the ranch, and it was not Pete and Cody coming back. It was a man Evelyn did not recognize. A tall man in a city coat, the kind of coat that does not belong on a mountain in October, carrying the particular expression of someone who has been sent rather than arrived. He asked for Nathaniel Walker. Nathaniel came to the door. The man handed him an envelope. He tipped his hat and left. Nathaniel stood in the doorway and looked at the envelope for a moment, and something in the way his hands went still on it told Evelyn that he already knew, before he opened it, what it was going to say. He opened it. He read it. He handed it to her. It was a legal notice from a law office in Denver. It stated that Caleb Walker, as co-holder of the original land grant under which the Walker property had been established, was formally contesting the north acreage boundary and requesting arbitration through a circuit judge who would be arriving in Pine Creek in 2 weeks. Evelyn read it twice. "He can do this?" she asked. "He can make them come and look," Nathaniel said. His voice was very flat. "The original grant was in both our names, mine and his from our father. I bought out his share 7 years ago. I have the papers." He paused. "But he has a lawyer from Denver and I have papers in a box under my bed." She absorbed this. "Then the first thing we do," she said, "is get your papers out of the box." "Evelyn, Nathaniel." She looked at him steadily. "He came at us 2 ways at once. The rumor to shake the town and this to shake you. He wants you rattled. He wants you to feel surrounded." She held up the legal notice. "This is paper. Your papers are also paper. The circuit judge reads both." He looked at her. "You're not rattled," he said. "I am absolutely rattled," she said. "I'm just not going to let that be the first thing I do." Something shifted in his face, hard and warm at the same time, a combination she was still learning to read, but was beginning to understand, meant the deepest form of respect he had. "The papers are in a tin box," he said. "On the left side, under the winter blankets." "I'll get them," she said. She found the tin box. She brought it to the kitchen table. They spread the papers out and went through them, one by one in the lamplight. Evelyn reading carefully, while Nathaniel identified each document, and by 9 o'clock they had a clear picture. Nathaniel's purchase of Caleb's share was documented, witnessed, and recorded. It was solid. A good lawyer would see it was solid in 10 minutes. But Caleb's lawyer was from Denver, and Nathaniel did not have a lawyer. "Irene Pruitt," Evelyn said suddenly. Nathaniel looked up. "What about her?" She mentioned at the market her husband was a county recorder before he died. She knows the legal process here. She would know who to speak to. Evelyn began carefully stacking the papers. "And she is not a woman who is impressed by lawyers from Denver." Nathaniel stared at her. "You've known Irene Pruitt for 3 weeks," he said. "I know people quickly," she said, "when they're worth knowing." He kept staring at her. Then he said, "I'll go see her tomorrow morning." "We'll go," she said. He opened his mouth. "Nathaniel," she said quietly, "I am in this with you, not watching from the side while you handle it. In it, with you." She met his eyes. "Unless you don't want me to be." The lamp burned between them on the table. His papers were spread between them on the table. Everything they had built over 6 weeks, the fence posts and the preserved apples and the heifer on her feet and the bread that got better every time, and the morning silences that had turned into something she could not name but would not give back for anything. All of it was on the table too, in its way. "I want you to be," he said, quietly, completely. She nodded. She began folding the papers back into the tin box, each one carefully, each one exactly as it had been. Outside, the wind had picked up. October wind, mean and purposeful, and coming from the northwest, which Nathaniel had told her meant weather building. She set the lid on the tin box and pressed it closed. "What kind of man," she said quietly, not looking up, "spends 2 years trying to take his brother's land?" "A man who thinks he deserves more than he earned," Nathaniel said. She finally looked up. "Does he know," she said carefully, "that if he pushes hard enough that it won't make you sell, that it'll just make you harder?" Nathaniel was quiet. "Probably not," he said. "Caleb has always assumed that everyone has a breaking point that looks like his. And yours doesn't," she said. "Mine doesn't look like his," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Neither does mine," she said. The wind pushed at the house. The lamp flickered once and steadied. And Evelyn Carter, sitting at a kitchen table in a Colorado mountain house in the middle of the worst month of her life, understood something she had not understood before. She had come here thinking she was starting over. She had come here thinking that if she worked hard enough and endured enough and proved herself enough, she might eventually be allowed into a life that resembled the one she deserved. She had not understood that she was not here to be allowed into anything. She was here to build it. She was building it right now on this table with these papers, with this man in this wind. And Caleb Walker, with his Denver lawyer, and his legal notice, and his carefully spread rumors, and his practiced smile, had made one mistake that people like him always made. He had assumed she was the weak point. He had assumed Nathaniel's care for her was a vulnerability. He had not understood, and she could see clearly that he had not understood, that the thing he was pushing against was not one person. It was 2. And 2 people who have chosen each other on purpose in the full knowledge of what that choice costs are not a weak point. They are the strongest thing there is. Irene Pruitt opened her door the next morning before they knocked. She had seen them coming up the road from her window, and she was already standing in the doorway with her coat on and her arms crossed, and the expression of a woman who has been expecting trouble and is not surprised it has finally arrived with company. "I heard," she said before either of them spoke. "About the legal notice," Nathaniel said. "About both," Irene said. She looked at Evelyn. "You holding up?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "Good." Irene stepped back from the door. "Come in. I put coffee on 20 minutes ago." Inside Irene's kitchen was small and absolutely organized, the kind of order that belongs to a woman who has lived alone long enough to arrange everything exactly as she wants it, and has no intention of rearranging it for anyone. She poured 3 cups without asking how they took it, set them on the table, sat down and held out her hand to Nathaniel. "Let me see the notice," she said. He gave it to her. She read it in approximately 45 seconds, which told Evelyn the woman read the way she did everything else fast, completely without waste. "Howard Fitch," she said, looking at the lawyer's name on the letterhead. "Denver firm. He's competent, but he's expensive, which means Caleb is spending money he's counting on getting back." She set the notice down. "The boundary challenge is thin. If your purchase papers are clean, a circuit judge will see that in one sitting." "The papers are clean," Nathaniel said. "Then what you need is someone to stand in front of the judge and say so clearly before Fitch gets the chance to make thin look thick." She looked at him steadily. "There's a man in Boulder named Garrett, Thomas Garrett. He did county recording for 15 years before he moved to practice. He knows boundary law the way I know dried herbs. He owes me a conversation." She paused. "I'll write to him today." Nathaniel looked at her. "Irene, I don't know how to—" "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Garrett is particular. He'll want to read everything himself before he agrees to anything." She looked at Evelyn. "And there's the other matter." "The rumors," Evelyn said. "The rumors," Irene confirmed. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Cody Marsh told his version last night at the feed store. Pete backed him up. That helped." She said it plainly without sentiment. But Caleb was at Hartley's saloon an hour later saying the boys were covering for Nathaniel because they needed the work. The air in the kitchen shifted. Evelyn set her cup down carefully. "Of course he was," she said. "He's good at this," Irene said without admiration. "Just fact. He finds the seam in a story and he pulls it." She looked between them. "The only thing that seals a seam like that is public truth. Not whispered truth, not privately known truth. Public." "The town gathering," Nathaniel said. It was not a question. Irene nodded. "First Saturday of November. 2 weeks out. The circuit judge arrives the following Monday." She looked at Evelyn directly. "If you stand up at that gathering and tell your piece your own words, your own mouth, it changes the order of things. The town hears you before the judge arrives." Caleb can't reframe what's already been said clearly in a public room. Evelyn was quiet. Nathaniel said, "She shouldn't have to do that." "No," Irene agreed. "She shouldn't. But we're not talking about what should be. We're talking about what works." She kept her eyes on Evelyn. "It's your choice. It's always your choice. But I've watched this town for 30 years and I know how it moves. It moves toward the person who stands up. It always has." Evelyn looked at the table for a long moment. She thought about the stagecoach, the suitcase in the dirt, the laughter she had absorbed without flinching because she had no other option. She thought about 25 years of being quiet in rooms where being quiet was the only dignity available. She thought about what Nathaniel had said in the kitchen, the only thing that lasts is truth consistently over time. And she thought about Irene's version of the same thing, harder and faster and more practical. She looked up. "I'll speak," she said. Irene nodded once. The matter was closed. The 2 weeks before the gathering were the strangest of Evelyn's life. Strange because things kept happening simultaneously that had no right to happen at the same time. Good things and bad things and frightening things and small tender things, all of them running alongside each other like rivers that refused to stay in their separate banks. The good Thomas Garrett wrote back to Irene in 4 days. He came up from Boulder on the Thursday before the gathering, a compact man in his 60s, with ink-stained fingers and the unhurried manner of someone who has seen enough legal maneuvering to find it more tedious than threatening. He spent 3 hours at the kitchen table, with Nathaniel's papers spread around him, and said almost nothing the entire time, except occasional short sounds that were neither positive nor negative, but deeply focused. And then he looked up and said, "This is straightforward. Your purchase was recorded, witnessed, and filed correctly. The challenge will fail." Nathaniel let out a breath Evelyn suspected he had been holding for 2 weeks. "Why is he bringing it then?" Nathaniel asked. Garrett looked at him over the papers. "Because he's hoping you don't have a lawyer and won't know that. Because thin challenges occasionally work when the other side is intimidated into settling." He began stacking the papers neatly. He did not anticipate Irene Pruitt. "Nobody anticipates Irene Pruitt," Nathaniel said. "Wise people try," Garrett said, and began writing notes in a small ledger. The bad Caleb escalated. The rumors about Evelyn and Cody Marsh had not died. They had evolved the way rumors do when they have a careful hand behind them, gaining detail with each retelling, each added detail, making the whole thing feel more real than the version before it. By the second week, Evelyn heard through Pete that the story had grown to include specific times and specific nights and specific words she had supposedly said, none of which had any relationship to reality, but all of which sounded just plausible enough, just specific enough to be the kind of thing people repeat with lowered voices and significant looks. She did not let Nathaniel see how much this cost her. She told herself it was because she didn't want him to feel responsible for her pain, which was true. She also told herself with more difficulty that she was fine, which was less true. The truth was that there is a particular kind of injury that comes from being lied about publicly. Not the sharp, sudden pain of a direct insult, but a slow, grinding thing. The feeling of your own story being taken out of your hands and rewritten by someone who has never met you and doesn't need to, because the story they're telling is not about you specifically. It's about the kind of woman they've already decided you are. She had been that kind of woman her whole life. She was tired of it in a way that lived deep in her bones. But she got up every morning. She fed the cattle. She worked the fence line. She made bread that was now genuinely good, not just better than the first time, but actually good. The kind of bread Cody Marsh made a specific face about when he ate it, a face of pure, unguarded appreciation that made Pete roll his eyes and made Evelyn feel something warm in her chest that she needed those 2 weeks more than she could say. The frightening thing, 4 days before the gathering, Caleb came to the ranch again. This time Nathaniel was there. This time Nathaniel opened the door. Evelyn stayed in the kitchen. She did not hide. She stayed where she was at the kitchen table, reading the livestock manual, because she had a right to be at her kitchen table, and she was not going to vacate it because Caleb Walker had ridden up the road. She could hear them on the porch. Caleb's voice was pleasant. It was always pleasant. That was the thing about it that she understood now as a mechanism, rather than a quality pleasantness, as a tool deployed to make the person responding to it seem unreasonable by comparison. "I'm not trying to be the villain here, Nathan." "You filed a legal challenge against my land," Nathaniel said, flat, controlled. "I have a legitimate concern about the boundary. Surely you understand I have a right to—" "Caleb?" Nathaniel's voice did not rise. It went the other direction, lower, more final. "Stop." A pause. "I'm trying to protect you," Caleb said. "No," Nathaniel said. "You're trying to protect an investment you think you're owed. Those are different things. You know they're different things." Another pause. Longer. "That woman," Caleb said, and the shift in his voice when he said that woman was small, but Evelyn heard it clearly through the wall, the slight drop of pretense, the slight reveal of what was actually underneath, "is going to cost you more than the North acreage." "Caleb," Nathaniel said, "I'm asking you one time to leave. After this, I stop asking." The silence stretched. Then the sound of boots crossing the porch. A horse being turned. Hooves on the frozen ground going away. Then Nathaniel came inside. He came directly into the kitchen. He looked at Evelyn at the table, and she looked back at him, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement wordless and complete of what had just happened and what it meant and what was coming. He sat down across from her. "He's not going to stop," he said. "I know," she said. "Not until the judge rules. Not until the gathering goes the way it's going to go." He paused. "Maybe not even then." "Maybe not even then," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "Evelyn," he said. "Nathaniel, when this is over—" He stopped. He was not a man who said things before they were fully formed. She had learned to wait while he found the shape of what he meant. "When this is over, I want to talk to you about something." She looked at him steadily. "What something?" "About the future," he said. "About what this is." He held her gaze. "About what I want it to be." The kitchen was very quiet. "All right," she said softly. "After the gathering," he said. "After the gathering?" She agreed. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers the way he had weeks ago, but this time he did not pull it back. He left it there, warm and certain, and she turned her hand over under his and held on. The morning of the town gathering arrived with a hard frost and a clear sky, which Nathaniel said was either good luck or the land showing off, and Evelyn suspected it was both. She was awake at 4 again. Old habit now. She lay in the dark and ran through what she intended to say the way she had been running through it for 2 weeks. Not memorizing it, Because memorized things sound memorized, and she needed to sound like herself. But finding the shape of it, the order, the places where the truth was sharpest, and the places where it needed to be plain and simple rather than sharp. She had one chance. She had always known she had one chance. Crowds are not patient with second attempts. If she stood up in that room and faltered or said too much or said too little, or let the emotion get ahead of the truth, Caleb would find the gap and fill it before she could recover. She got up. She made breakfast. She was setting the table when Nathaniel came into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway and looked at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Something openly vulnerable in it, which was rare for him. He kept his vulnerabilities private, the way careful men do, the way men who have been alone for a long time do, because privacy becomes a habit when there is no one to share with. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Yes, I do," she said. "Not for me. Not just for you," she said. She turned to look at him fully. "For every time I stayed quiet, because staying quiet was the only choice. For every room I walked out of so other people would be more comfortable." She held his gaze. "I am done leaving rooms, Nathaniel." He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. "Now sit down and eat," she said. "We have a long morning." The gathering was held in the church, the only building in Pine Creek large enough to hold most of the town at once. By the time Nathaniel and Evelyn arrived, it was already filling 50-60 people, the noise of many conversations running together into a low specific hum that Evelyn recognized as a crowd that was already keyed up, already expecting something, already choosing sides before the first word was said. Irene Pruitt was standing near the door. She looked at Evelyn when they came in and gave her a single nod. Not encouraging, just acknowledging. "You're here." "Good." Thomas Garrett was in the back corner with a leather case on his knee, making notes in his small ledger, paying no attention to anyone in the room, which Evelyn suspected was entirely calculated. Cody and Pete Marsh were near the front. Cody turned when they came in and gave Evelyn a look of such fierce, young, unambiguous loyalty that she had to look away for a moment. Caleb was there. He was standing near the front talking to Bill Hartley, and when Nathaniel and Evelyn walked in, he looked over just briefly, just a flicker of his eyes, and his practiced smile did not change, not even slightly. That was the thing about Caleb's smile. It did not change because it was not connected to anything real. The gathering was opened by the town mayor, a man named Aldous Pryor, who had the exhausted dignity of someone who has been trying to hold a small mountain town together for many years and has learned that the best thing he can do is keep things moving. He talked about the upcoming winter. He talked about the road maintenance fund. He talked about the school roof that needed patching before December. And then he said, "There have been some discussions in town this past month about various matters. I think it's time we address them directly. Anyone who has something to say is welcome to say it." The room shifted. Caleb moved first. He was good at that, at reading the moment, and taking it before someone else could. He stepped forward with the ease of a man who has always been comfortable at the front of rooms, and he spoke in that warm, practiced voice that filled a space without effort. "I appreciate Mayor Pryor giving us this opportunity," he said. "I want to address some concerns about my brother's ranch." He paused, a perfectly calibrated pause long enough to create weight short enough not to lose anyone. "I love my brother. Everyone in this room knows that. I've always supported Nathaniel. But I have to be honest about my concerns that a lot of people in this town share about the situation up on that mountain." Murmurs. Not against him. With him. Evelyn felt the room moving in his direction, and she understood clearly that this was the moment. Not later. Not after he had finished. Not after he had shaped the air of the room with his words and let it set. Now. She stood up. The murmuring stopped. Caleb turned to look at her. His pleasant face did not change, but something behind his eyes did, something quick and sharp and quickly hidden. "Miss Carter," Mayor Pryor said, "you're welcome to speak." She walked forward. She stood where everyone could see her. She did not look at Caleb. She looked at the room, at the faces of people who had laughed at her on the street 6 weeks ago, and the faces of people who had bought her preserves at the market, and Margaret Hollis with her sympathetic eyes, and Ruth Sayers, who had bought the second jar grudgingly, and Bill Hartley in the back with his red suspenders and his forever-ready audience. She took one breath, and then she spoke. "I came to Pine Creek 6 weeks ago on a stagecoach," she said. "Most of you were there. Most of you saw what happened when I stepped off that coach." She kept her voice even, clear. "A man threw my suitcase in the dirt and called me livestock, and everyone laughed." She paused, just a beat. "I want to tell you what I did after that. Because the story that's been going around this town is not about what I did after that. And you deserve to hear what I actually did." The room was completely still. She told them, not everything, the right things. She told them about the mornings before sunrise. She told them about the cattle, and the fence, and the bread, and the frozen water line, and the heifer who went down in the night. She told them about Cody Marsh being at the barn after her, not before, and why, and she looked directly at Cody when she said it, and he straightened his spine and nodded once clearly for the whole room to see. She told them about the preserves. 14 jars, the market Saturday, 11 sold. 2 to Margaret Hollis, she said it plainly, without accusation, without anything but the fact, and Margaret's face did something complicated and honest. And then she stopped telling them what she had done, and she told them what she was. "I am not," she said quietly, "what this town decided I was when I stepped off that stagecoach. I know that's not what you decided out of malice. I know most of you decided it the way people always do, quickly from a distance, based on what I look like, rather than who I am." She looked around the room. "I have been that woman my whole life, the woman people decide about before she speaks. I am telling you that you were wrong, and I am not saying that angrily. I'm saying it because it is true, and because the truth said clearly in a public room is the only way a lie spread in a public room gets answered." She looked at Caleb, directly, for the first time. "The rumors about me and Cody Marsh are a lie," she said. "They were started by someone who wants Nathaniel Walker's North acreage badly enough to damage an innocent woman's name to get it. Everyone in this room can decide for themselves who that is." She held Caleb's gaze for 1 second, 2, 3. "And when the circuit judge arrives on Monday and reads the purchase papers that clearly document Nathaniel's lawful ownership of that land, that person's other reasons for being here will become apparent too." The silence in the room was absolute. Caleb's pleasant face had gone finally through something it had not gone through in all the weeks she had watched it. It had gone uncertain. The smile was still there. It would always be there. It was built too deep to vanish entirely, but for the first time, it was not in control of the room. Mayor Pryor cleared his throat, and then Nathaniel Walker stood up. He did not come to the front. He stood where he was in the middle of the room, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that everyone had to be silent to hear it, which was, Evelyn would realize later, exactly the right instinct. A quiet voice in a room that is already straining to hear has more authority than the loudest voice in it. "Evelyn Carter came to my ranch 6 weeks ago," Nathaniel said. "I want you to hear me say clearly in front of all of you that she is the most capable, honest, and courageous person I have had beside me in 20 years of running that property." He paused. "Not the most capable woman. The most capable person." Another pause. "What has been said about her in this town is a lie. I know who started it and why. And I want every person in this room to understand that the woman you laughed at the day she stepped off that stagecoach is the reason my ranch will make it through this winter. She is the reason my cattle are fed, and my fences are standing, and there is food in my kitchen." He stopped. "I am not asking you to apologize to her. I am asking you to look at her and correct what you see, because what you decided about her was wrong, and wrong should be corrected when it can be." The room was so quiet Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat. Then Irene Pruitt from near the door said clearly, "He's right." Margaret Hollis said more quietly, "He's right." And then the room began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, not with the kind of operatic reversal that happens in stories told for simple satisfaction. It shifted the way real things shift slowly, person by person, the weight of the room moving its center from one place to another, the way a crowd recalibrates when the story it has been told runs into the story it can actually see. Caleb left before the gathering ended. He did not make an announcement. He simply walked out, his good coat, his clean boots, his practiced smile, directed at no one and nothing, and the sound of the door closing behind him was the most honest thing he did all evening. Outside, after Evelyn stood in the cold air and let the night settle around her, Nathaniel came to stand beside her. For a while, neither of them said anything. The sounds of people leaving the gathering moved around them. Voices, boots, horses, the particular mix of noise that belongs to a small town after a significant event, processing and recalibrating and deciding what to make of things. "You were magnificent," Nathaniel said. She looked at him. "I was terrified," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why it was magnificent." She let out a long breath. "Caleb," she said. "He'll regroup." "He will," Nathaniel agreed. "But the judge comes Monday. Garrett is ready. And the town just heard you." He looked at her steadily. "He's working against a tide now. It'll hold." She nodded slowly. They stood there a moment longer. Then Evelyn said, "You said you wanted to talk, after the gathering." Nathaniel was quiet. "I did," he said. She looked at him. "Then talk." He turned to face her fully, and in the cold night air, with the mountains dark above Pine Creek, and the last of the townspeople moving off down the street. Nathaniel Walker, the quietest and most deliberate man she had ever known, said what he had been building toward for 6 weeks, with the same patience he used on fences that needed to be set deep enough to hold through winter. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because the ranch needs you, not because the winter's coming and the work is hard." He held her gaze. "Because I wake up every morning, and the first thing I think about is you. And I have not thought that about a single person in my life before now." He paused. "I am asking you to marry me, Evelyn, not because I have to, because there is nothing in my life that is better without you in it." She looked at him for a long time. The cold moved between them. The stars overhead were extraordinary, the way they always were at this altitude. "You know," she said finally, "that I'm going to burn the beans again." Something broke open in his face, real, completely unguarded, the most undefended she had ever seen him, and he laughed. A real laugh, short and sudden, completely unplanned, the laugh of a man surprised by joy. "I know," he said. "And I'll argue with you," she said. "I don't back down easily." "I know that too," he said. "And the whole town has an opinion about me." "They're correcting it," he said. She took one breath. "Yes," she said. He stared at her. "Yes?" he said. "Yes, Nathaniel," she said. "I will marry you." He reached forward, and he held her face in both his cold, work-roughened hands, and he kissed her, the way the first time had only been a beginning of full and certain, and completely without reservation in the middle of the main street of Pine Creek, where anyone still standing around could see it clearly. And that was exactly the point. The circuit judge arrived on Monday morning exactly as expected, and his name was Samuel Cord, and he was a man who had been administering law in Colorado Territory for 11 years, and had the particular expression of someone who has seen every variety of human dishonesty and found all of them tedious. He sat up in the mayor's office. He asked for the papers. He read them. It took him 22 minutes. Thomas Garrett was present. Howard Fitch Caleb's Denver lawyer was present. Nathaniel was present. Evelyn sat in the hallway outside on a wooden bench because there were not enough chairs in the mayor's office, and she had told Nathaniel to take the chair, and she sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, and she listened to the sound of papers being shuffled and the occasional low voice, and she counted the boards in the floor across from her, and reminded herself to breathe evenly. The door opened after 22 minutes. Thomas Garrett came out first. He looked at Evelyn. "Straightforward," he said. "Just as I told you." She let out the breath she had been quietly holding for 2 weeks. Inside, she could hear Judge Cord's voice, flat and final. Mr. Fitch, the purchase was legally recorded in 1874. The boundary is established. The challenge has no merit. I'm dismissing it. And then, Fitch's voice, controlled and professional, the voice of a man who loses gracefully because he is paid to understood your honor. And then nothing. Caleb did not speak. Evelyn had not expected him to. The silence from inside that room was the particular silence of a man recalculating, not admitting defeat. Because men like Caleb do not admit defeat. They simply find a new angle, but recalculating quietly, behind that practiced smile that nobody in the mayor's office could see at this exact moment, but that was undoubtedly still in place. Nathaniel came out. He looked at Evelyn. She looked at him. "Done," she said. "Done," he said. She stood up from the bench. She straightened her coat. "Then let's go home," she said. And they were halfway to the wagon when Caleb came out of the mayor's office behind them. "Nathan," he said. Nathaniel stopped walking. He did not turn immediately. He stood still for a moment, just a breath, just enough time to decide what he was going to do with the next few minutes, and then he turned. Caleb looked for the first time since Evelyn had known him like a man who was carrying something heavy and had been carrying it long enough that the weight was starting to show. The good coat was still good, the boots were still clean. But his face had lost the particular ease it usually wore, and underneath it, visible now, the way something is visible when the light changes, was something that looked almost like a man who knew he had gone wrong somewhere and was trying to locate exactly where. "I'd like to speak to you," Caleb said. "You're speaking," Nathaniel said. Caleb's eyes moved to Evelyn. "Privately," he said. "No," Nathaniel said. "Simply, without heat. Whatever you say to me, you say in front of her. That is how it is now." Caleb looked at his brother for a long moment. Something moved through his face, complex and private, the kind of thing that happens inside a person when they realize the ground they were standing on has shifted permanently and will not shift back. "I overstepped," he said finally. Nathaniel was quiet. "The legal challenge," Caleb said. "And the other matter." His eyes moved briefly to Evelyn and away again. "I overstepped." The word hung in the cold morning air. Evelyn waited. Nathaniel said very quietly, "Yes, you did." "I had reasons." "You had reasons," Nathaniel agreed. "They were wrong." Caleb's jaw tightened. "The property was never yours after 1874, Nathaniel said. "You know that. You've always known that." He paused. "The property was never the point, Caleb. You wanted me to need you. You've always wanted that. And when I stopped needing you, you couldn't stand it." The silence between them was not comfortable. It was not the silence of resolution. It was the silence of a truth that has finally been said out loud after a very long time underground, and truth like that does not feel clean when it first comes out. It feels raw and difficult and real. Caleb looked at Evelyn, directly. For the first time since she had known him, without the calculated pleasantness, without the careful management of expression. Just looking at her with something in his face that she recognized after a moment as the beginning of shame. Not full shame, not yet, possibly not for a long time, but the beginning of it. "Miss Carter," he said. She held his gaze. "The things that were said about you," he said. "I started that." He did not dress it up. She would give him that. When he was stripped of the pleasantness, he was at least direct. It was wrong. She looked at him for a long time. "Yes," she said. It was. He waited as if for more, for forgiveness or anger or something larger than what she gave him. She did not give him anything larger. She gave him only the truth, simply stated, and let him carry the weight of it himself, because the weight was his, and she was done carrying things that belonged to other people. Caleb nodded once. He looked at Nathaniel. "I'll drop the Denver firm," he said. I know, Nathaniel said. Another pause. Can we? Caleb stopped. His voice had done something it hadn't done before, gone uncertain the way a voice goes when it is asking something real rather than managing a situation. Can we find a way back from this, Nathan? Nathaniel looked at his brother for a long time. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Ask me in a year. It was not a door closed. It was not a door open. It was the most truthful answer available, and Caleb, to his credit, seemed to understand that. He nodded. He looked once more at Evelyn, not with warmth, not yet, but with something that was trying to be honest, and he walked away. Nathaniel stood watching him go. Evelyn stood beside him. Are you all right? She asked. No, he said. Then, but I will be. She put her hand through his arm. He looked down at her hand, and his jaw worked slightly, and then he covered her hand with his, and they walked to the wagon. They were married on the last Saturday of November. Irene Pruitt stood beside Evelyn. Pete Marsh stood beside Nathaniel. Cody Marsh sat in the front pew and cried in the completely undefended way that 19-year-olds cry when something genuinely moves them, making no attempt to hide it, which Pete observed with the expression of a man who loves his brother and has accepted that dignity is not Cody's strongest feature. Mayor Pryor performed the ceremony, which was short and plain and entirely correct. Thomas Garrett attended because Irene had invited him, and Irene's invitations carried the particular force of a woman who has never once in her life been ignored when she required something. Margaret Hollis brought a cake, which Evelyn accepted graciously and without irony, because Margaret Hollis was not a bad woman. She was a woman who had been wrong, and she was trying in the way people try when they are genuinely correcting themselves, which is imperfectly and sincerely and with baked goods. Ruth Sayers brought preserves, apple preserves, in a jar that was clearly a different brand than Evelyn's, because Ruth Sayers was not going to admit complete defeat, and Evelyn understood this perfectly and loved it about her. Bill Hartley did not attend. Nobody mentioned it. Judge Cord, who was still in town finishing other business and had no reason to attend a wedding, attended anyway, sitting in the back in his plain coat and reading what appeared to be case notes and occasionally looking up with the expression of a man who has decided that this is an acceptable use of an afternoon. Henry the Cattle was not invited, but expressed loud opinions from the barn throughout the ceremony, which Cody later said was Henry's way of celebrating, and Pete said was Henry being Henry, and Nathaniel said nothing at all, but the corner of his mouth did something. When the ceremony ended, and the Reverend said what Reverends say, and Nathaniel kissed her brief, certain exactly like the first time Evelyn heard the room around her and felt the specific quality of it, warm and imperfect and real. These people who had laughed at her and doubted her and bought her preserves and told her she was brave in the particular way that was not quite a compliment. All of them here now in this room, because the story had turned in a direction none of them had expected, and she thought that this exact collection of imperfect things was what she had come to Colorado for. Not the wedding, not the moment, the turning, the fact that things could turn. Winter came in hard and full 2 weeks after the wedding, and stayed until March, which was longer than most years and more demanding than the livestock manual had adequately prepared Evelyn for. She did not care. She got up before light. She fed the cattle. She learned to move through the snow with the particular efficiency that comes from doing a thing repeatedly until it stops being a task and becomes simply how you move through the world. She burned things less. She fixed things more. She learned that a fence post set wrong in October becomes a catastrophe in February, and she learned to set fence posts correctly, and she filed that knowledge in the same place. She filed everything, deep, permanent, useful. Nathaniel worked beside her every day, not in front of her, not behind her, beside. She had not known before this what that felt like. She had known men who helped from a position of superiority, men who stepped in when they decided she needed it, men who managed her efforts with the benevolent condescension of someone certain they were doing her a favor. Nathaniel did not help from any direction except alongside. He handed her what she needed before she asked. He stepped back when she was managing. He stepped forward when the weight was genuinely too much. It was the most intimate thing she had ever experienced. More intimate than any declaration, any gesture, any planned moment. The intimacy of being known well enough that another person knows when to move. In January, Pete Marsh told her that his mother in town was struggling with the winter, her joints bad, her firewood running low. And Evelyn told Nathaniel at dinner, and by the next morning, 2 things had happened. Nathaniel had arranged for a cord of wood to be delivered from their supply, and Evelyn had visited with a jar of the beef broth she'd been putting up all autumn. Pete found out. He did not make a speech about it. He just worked harder the following week, and when Evelyn said nothing about the extra work, he worked harder the week after that too. This was how things moved in the Walker house that winter. Not through announcements, through actions that accumulated into a direction. February brought the moment nobody had planned for. It arrived on a Tuesday night, which was appropriate because the worst things rarely choose dramatic timing. A rider came up from town at 9 in the evening. A young man Evelyn didn't know, riding too fast for the conditions, with the tight-faced expression of someone carrying urgent news. He asked for Nathaniel Walker. Nathaniel came to the door. "There's a wagon accident on the pass road," the young man said. 2 wagons. Coming down from the lumber camp. The road gave way, ice undermined it. 4 men down, maybe more. He was breathing hard. "Doc Renner is out at the Billings place 6 miles south, won't be back till morning. There's nobody, people don't know what to—" "How far out?" Nathaniel said. "1.5 miles up the pass, maybe 2. Nathaniel looked at Evelyn. She was already getting her coat. She had been building the medicine chest since November, quietly, methodically, after reading everything she could find, and after a long conversation with Doc Renner himself in town one afternoon, when she had asked him plain questions, and he had answered them plainly because he recognized someone who was asking in order to learn, and not in order to seem informed. Clean cloth in quantity, alcohol for cleaning, willow bark for pain and fever, splinting materials, a proper bone saw she hoped never to use, thread and needles. Everything labeled, everything organized. She pulled the chest from the shelf in the side room. She looked at the young rider. "Can you carry this on your horse?" He stared at the chest. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Then let's go," she said. The scene on the pass road was exactly what a wagon accident in February ice looks like, which is to say it was bad and cold and loud, with the particular noise of men in pain who are trying not to show how much pain they are in, because showing it feels like another thing to be ashamed of. 2 wagons. One had gone sideways into the bank and trapped a man's leg underneath the rear axle. 3 others were down in various stages of injury. 1 conscious and walking wounded. 1 with his arm at an angle that was obviously wrong. 1 not moving at all when they arrived but breathing, which Evelyn confirmed by crouching beside him in the snow and putting her face close to his and feeling the faint warmth of breath on her cheek. She stood up. "This one breathes," she said. "He's concussed. Don't move him until we know his spine is sound." She went to the man with the arm. She talked him through it. Not with the soothing voice people sometimes use with the injured. The voice that signals everything is fine when it clearly is not. But with a direct voice, calm and specific, telling him exactly what she was doing and why, which she had learned was what actually helped. And she set the arm and splinted it with the materials from the chest, while Nathaniel and the young rider and 2 other men worked the wheel off the man with the trapped leg. She heard the man with the trapped leg cry out when the wheel came free. She was beside him in seconds. She cleaned it. She packed it. She told him the same thing she had told the other man, direct, specific, calm, and she held his hand while she did what needed doing, not because she was sentimental, but because she had discovered that having your hand held while someone does something painful is not sentimentality. It is the difference between enduring something alone and enduring it with a witness, and the difference is enormous. They were there for 2 hours. By the time everything that could be done was done, and the injured men were stable enough to move down to town, Evelyn was cold through to her center. Her hands were shaking slightly from the sustained cold and the sustained concentration, and her dress had things on it she would deal with tomorrow. Nathaniel put his coat around her without asking. She let him. The young rider whose name she learned was Daniel Ashby, and who was 17, and who had been watching everything with wide eyes since they arrived, said from beside his horse, "Ma'am, I've never seen anybody." He stopped, started again. "Where did you learn all that?" "Books," she said. "And Doc Renner, and paying attention." He stared at her. "You saved those men," he said. "They were already alive when I got here," she said. "I just helped them stay that way." She handed the medicine chest back to Nathaniel to carry. Her hands had stopped shaking. The story of the wagon accident on the pass road traveled faster than any story Evelyn had been part of before, which was saying something because her stories had been traveling fast in Pine Creek since September. But this one was different. The stories before had traveled on the fuel of judgment and doubt, and the particular appetite that small communities have for the failures or perceived failures of people they are uncertain about. This story traveled on something else. It traveled on the fuel of 4 men who came back from the pass road and said plainly and publicly what had happened, which was that a woman from the Walker Ranch had arrived with medicines and knowledge and steady hands, and had managed a serious accident scene in the dark in February, cold, while most of the town's men stood around not knowing what to do. Daniel Ashby told it everywhere he went for a week, with the intensity of a 17-year-old, who has witnessed something that recalibrated his understanding of what people are capable of. He told it at the feed store. He told it at the general store. He told it at his own dinner table, and then apparently at every other dinner table he could gain access to. The man with the trapped leg, whose name was Frank Carver, a lumberman from the camp above the pass, came to the ranch himself, 10 days later, walking with a cane, his wife beside him, to say thank you in person. Evelyn made them coffee. Frank Carver sat at her kitchen table and said, "I want you to know that I was one of the ones that laughed when you came off that stagecoach in September." Evelyn looked at him. "I know," she said. He held her gaze. "I am not going to dress that up," he said. "It was wrong, and I knew it was wrong when I was doing it, and I did it anyway because everybody else was, and because—" He stopped. "Because it was easy." He paused. "This is not easy, but it's right." His wife, a quiet woman named Clara, who had said nothing since they arrived, put her hand over Evelyn's on the table. Evelyn looked down at that hand. She thought about the stagecoach, the suitcase in the dirt, the word livestock. She thought about 25 years of being the punchline, the cautionary tale the woman people pointed to when they wanted to feel better about their own ordinary lives. She thought about Nathaniel's hand on her arm, on the frozen fence line. She thought about bread that got better every time. She turned her hand over under Clara's and held it. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Both of you." Shunned. By March, when the snow began pulling back from the lower edges of the valley, something had shifted in Pine Creek that was not dramatic and not sudden, but was unmistakable. The way a season shifts not in one moment, but in an accumulation of moments, each one small, each one adding to the one before. Until one day you realize the air has changed, and the light is different, and the ground under your feet has gone from frozen to thawed. Margaret Hollis stopped Evelyn on the main street one morning and said, "We're organizing supplies for the Peterson family. Their barn burned in January, they've got 3 children, and nothing coming in. Could you spare anything?" Evelyn said, "I'll bring preserves and dried beef on Thursday." Margaret wrote it down in her small book. She looked up. "Evelyn," she said. Evelyn waited. "I owe you an apology," Margaret said. "For September. For the things I said that weren't unkind enough for anyone to call them what they were." She held Evelyn's gaze with visible effort, the effort of a woman who is not accustomed to admitting fault and is doing it anyway because she has decided it matters. "I decided what you were before I knew you. That was wrong." Evelyn looked at her. "You bought my preserves," she said. "Twice." Margaret blinked. "That was a start," Evelyn said. "This is better." Something released in Margaret's face. Not relief exactly. More like the specific feeling of having done something that needed doing, and having done it finally. Thursday, Margaret said. Thursday. Evelyn confirmed. She walked on. The twist that nobody saw coming arrived on the second Saturday of March. Caleb Walker walked into the general store while Evelyn was there buying supplies, and she saw him before he saw her. And for 1/2 second, she considered whether to simply turn and handle the interaction, the way she had always handled such things with the neutral composure that she had developed over years as armor. She did not turn away. He saw her. He stopped. And then he did something she had not expected from him. He crossed the store. He stood in front of her. He reached into his coat and took out an envelope and held it out to her. She looked at it. "What is this?" she asked. "The land," he said. "The North Acreage. I had a deed drawn up transferring my original claim, the one I filed the challenge under, entirely to Nathaniel. Permanently. No conditions." He paused. "It should have been done in 1874. It wasn't. I'm doing it now." She stared at him. "Caleb, I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I don't want thanks. I don't want a conversation about it." He held the envelope steady. "I want my brother to have what's his without any doubt remaining. And I want—" He stopped, looked at the envelope, then at her. "I want to be able to look at myself in a mirror. That's all." She took the envelope. She held it. "You could have mailed this," she said. "Yes," he said. "But you came yourself." "Yes," he said again. She looked at him for a long moment, at this man who had tried to use her as a lever, who had spread lies with a pleasant face, who had underestimated her so completely that his underestimation had become the tool of his own undoing. And she saw underneath all of it what Nathaniel had been trying to tell her that first night. Not a bad person. A person who had gone wrong. There was a difference. The difference was not comfortable, and it did not erase what he had done, but it was real. "Tell Nathaniel yourself," she said. He looked at her. "He'll listen," she said. "He's a man who knows how to be angry at someone and still listen to them. It's one of the better things about him." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. He left. Evelyn stood in the general store with the envelope in her hand. The man behind the counter, old Marcus Webb, who had been running the store since before Evelyn was born, and who had watched everything that had happened in that store that morning with the focused attention of a man who has no intention of pretending he wasn't listening, said, "That's a thing." "It is," she agreed. "You handled it well," he said. She put the envelope in her coat pocket, next to the place where Nathaniel's first letter used to live. "I've had practice," she said.
Jinmo.
She gave the deed to Nathaniel that evening at the kitchen table. She told him how it had happened, what Caleb had said, what she had said back. Nathaniel held the envelope and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You told him I'd listen." "You would," she said. "You don't know that for certain," he said. "Yes, I do," she said. He looked at her across the kitchen table, this table where they had spread legal papers, and read the livestock manual, and burned the beans, and made plans, and held hands, and told each other hard truths, and built something that neither of them had known how to build until they were building it. And he said, "When did you learn to know me better than I know myself?" "September," she said. "Around the second week." That thing happened at the corner of his mouth. She smiled back at it fully, the way she had started allowing herself to smile when she was with him openly, without calculating how it looked, without the old instinct to make herself smaller and less visible and less present. She was done making herself smaller. She had crossed a mountain pass in the dark to keep 4 men alive. She had stood in a church room and told the truth to people who had laughed at her. She had sat across from the man who spread lies about her and found in him the beginning of something she had not expected to find. She had burned the beans and learned to make bread and set fence posts and kept a heifer alive in a frozen barn and sold 14 jars of preserves and said yes to a man on a street in November while the whole town watched. She had not become smaller. She had become exactly as large as she had always been, and she had simply stopped apologizing for it. That spring, Irene Pruitt organized what she called a practical skills gathering. Women meeting monthly to share knowledge from medicine to food preservation to cold weather livestock management. She asked Evelyn to lead the first session. Evelyn said yes. 12 women came to the first one, 17 to the second. By May, they had to move it to the church. Ruth Sayers came to every single one. She never acknowledged that she was doing this specifically because of Evelyn, and Evelyn never pointed it out. But Ruth paid close attention and took precise notes, and once at the end of a session on preserving techniques, said to Evelyn quietly, "Your apple preserves are still better than mine." "I'll show you the trick," Evelyn said. Ruth looked at her. "Next week," Ruth said. "Next week," Evelyn said. It was the most honest conversation they had ever had, and it was enough. Autumn came again. 1 year after a stagecoach rolled into Pine Creek and a man threw a woman's suitcase in the dirt and called her livestock, and the whole town laughed. 1 year. Evelyn stood on the porch of the Walker Ranch on a September evening and looked at the mountains going dark against a sky full of extraordinary stars, the same way she had stood here that first week, holding a letter she no longer needed to carry, because everything it had promised had turned out to be real. She heard the door. Nathaniel came to stand behind her. He put his arms around her, and she leaned back against him, and they stood like that in the cold evening air, looking at the same mountains he had been looking at for 20 years, and she had been looking at for one, and that somehow together they had both learned to see more clearly. "Frank Carver stopped by today while you were in town," he said. "What did he need?" "He didn't need anything," Nathaniel said. "He brought 2 cords of wood. Said you'd been helping Clara through the winter with the children, and he wanted to return something." Evelyn was quiet. "You didn't tell me about Clara," he said. "It wasn't a story," she said. "It was just Thursday afternoons." He tightened his arms around her slightly. She looked at the mountains. "Do you know what I thought?" she said when I stepped off that stagecoach. "Tell me," he said. "I thought this time will be different. This time you will not let them break you." She paused. "I had thought that before. Every time I started somewhere new. Every time I tried again." She felt his arms around her. The difference this time was that it was true. He was quiet. "Because of me," he said. "Because of me," she said. "You helped, but it was me." He pressed his mouth to her hair. "Yes," he said. "It was." She looked at the stars. She thought about every woman who had ever stepped off a stagecoach somewhere and been measured in a glance and found lacking by people who did not know her name. She thought about every woman who had been told in 100 different ways that her worth was her appearance, and that her appearance was a problem, and that being a problem was all she was. She thought about what it had taken to stand up in a church room and tell the truth to people who had already decided what to believe. She thought about bread that got better every time, about a heifer on her feet, about 14 jars of apple preserves, about a deed in an envelope, about Thursday afternoons with a quiet woman named Clara who needed company more than she needed anything else, and who never once commented on Evelyn's size because it had never once occurred to her to do so, because she was too busy being grateful that someone had knocked on her door. She thought about the specific weight of being loved by a man who had never once, not once in all the weeks and months of knowing her, looked at her and calculated what she lacked. A man who had simply looked at her and seen what was there. The stars over Pine Creek were extraordinary. They always would be. Evelyn Carter Walker stood on her porch on a September evening 1 year after everything began, held by the steadiest pair of arms she had ever known, and she understood with absolute and unshakable certainty the thing she had been building toward since the day she had pressed a blue Sunday dress back into a suitcase in the Colorado dirt, and lifted her chin and refused in that private, unwitnessed moment to let it finish her. A person's worth cannot be decided by a crowd. A heart that refuses to break is stronger than any mountain, and the woman they laughed at on a September afternoon in 1881 became the woman Pine Creek remembered long after the laughter had gone quiet, and the people who made it had grown old enough to know better. Not because she became someone different, but because she became completely and without apology exactly who she had always been. That was enough. That was everything. That was the whole story.